Welcome to episode 52 of the Strength in Words podcast. Today I'm speaking with Tracy Cutchlow, an award-winning journalist, author of the international bestseller 0 to 5, 70 Essential Parenting Tips Based on Science, and editor of the best-selling brain development books, Brain Rules for Baby, Brain Rules for Aging Well, and Brain Rules. She is a licensed language of listening coach. She is a mom, a recovering perfectionist, a triathlete, a yogi, and a nature girl. Tracy, welcome to Strength in Words.
Thanks so much.
I have asked you to come onto the show today to speak about a few ideas related to sort of positive parenting and specifically the language of listening. But first, let's just hear a little bit about you and what brought you to the kind of work that you're doing today.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I started out in journalism. I was used to being very competent in my career. Then had a baby and didn't feel so competent anymore. So
very relatable.
What really brought me to this work was feeling scared that I didn't know what the heck I was doing with a newborn baby. And because of that perfectionism that you mentioned, my approach was to really research all of the possible options to find the absolute best, and really use science as a way of guiding me, because after having edited those brain development books, I knew there was such good information out there that I needed, that other parents needed. But I wanted to know, like one level deeper, like how exactly would I apply this as a parent?
Right. Yeah.
So if the books would say that sign language is great for communicating with a baby, and here are all the benefits that it has for brain development. But I wanted to know, like, how did researchers teach this baby's sign language?
Right. Those actionable, sort of applicable strategies and tips that we can all use to actually implement things that we learn about. It's great.
Yeah, very practical. And just, most books have a lot of words in them. And when you're with a newborn baby, you just don't have the mental bandwidth for all of that. Like, to dig back through all the books that I'd read and try to find just the how-to tips was too much. And so the book that I wrote is really for me trying to solve those problems. I figured I was not the only one who would have them.
Yep.
And so my book is really like one tip per page, chunks of information, very practical and pretty, it doesn't look like homework. So
right. And a coffee table parenting book. Amazing.
Yeah, that's really what it is.
That's wonderful.
But then the way that I came to language of listening in particular, around age 2 or 3, things start to get difficult in a different way, where there's so much what feels like defiance and things things come up from your own childhood, like things start triggering you that you didn't even really know were there. And so I went off on a search again to find the best tools that I could for discipline.
Yeah.
And I felt like language of listening really kind of synthesized everything that I knew about brain development and was understanding about positive parenting.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's really like a simple framework for it. So
great. Well, we'd love to hear a little bit more about that. If you can tell us about the language of listening, and then really just sort of get us started on some of the basics about its foundations, what it is exactly.
Yeah. It's a way of communicating with children that is really focused on acknowledgement and on their strengths. I think so often we're focused on what our kids are doing wrong, what we would prefer them to be doing instead, and that kind of a deficit model, really.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, how does that interaction leave your kid feeling about themselves? And I think, for many of us, the model that we have for how we would communicate with kids is very much about like, well, I expect you to obey me immediately, to just do what I say because I'm the one who's asking you. And when you don't, then we take it personally and it's like an affront, and then things start escalating, and there's no good place to go from there.
Yeah.
So, and what I found with language of listening is that when you start from this place of connecting with your child and really acknowledging where they are in that moment, it's amazing for cutting down on these power struggles, just like not even getting into the escalation. And it's just a very accepting way of being, like really paying attention to who your child is and accepting that and looking for ways for them to meet the needs that they have in that moment. And I think about like walking in on a kid who's, well, here's an example. I walked in on my daughter in the bathroom. She was up on the counter spraying the mirror with a water bottle. And my first thought was like, what are you doing up there? What are you doing? But what I was able to say instead, because of language of listening, was, oh, you're spraying water on the mirror. Because the first step of it is to just say what you see in the moment. And doing that lets you come at the situation without a judgment about it.
Right.
Yeah. Which, of course, if we start with the judgment, then we're only setting ourselves up for defensiveness and power struggles and all of that.
Exactly. And it's amazing how early our children learn that they need to defend themselves against a judgment. I mean, I find that just fascinating.
Sure. Yeah. Nobody wants to feel like they're wrong, right? Or they're bad, or, yeah, it's funny. I think kids are clearly their own people. They have their own ways of doing things, their own wants and likes. And I think there's this period where it's kind of hard for us to get that, because as infants, we're so used to them being so reliant on us, and we're doing everything for them. And when their personality pops out, it's just like, wait a minute.
What happened?
I was in charge here.
Yeah. Wait a second. You've got your own way of doing things, and it's not always in cahoots with how I'm doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have to learn to really live together, I mean, and understand that we can't really control another person. And and our role with our child is more about coaching than behavior management.
Right.
Yeah. So the other thing that say what you see step does is just allow you to kind of pause for a second.
I was going to say that's a really useful tool, pretty much for any relationship.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So in that kind of split second, I was able to realize, like, okay, if you're going to play with water, the bathroom's a pretty darn good place for that. And so I said, oh, it's like then I was able to notice more about the situation, right? And instead of getting upset, I said, "Oh, it's almost like you're painting with water. Like, look at these little patterns." Um, and then, here's a towel for you to wipe up the mirror when you're done.
Redirect, or yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so it really could have been a completely different situation where she would have felt bad about being up on the counter, about making a mess on the mirror, all of that. And instead, she leaves feeling like, oh, I'm a creative person making a painting on the mirror, and my mom expects me to clean it up when I'm done. And yeah, not a big deal.
Exactly. And you leave. I mean, I think for many parents, it's so important to sort of reframe this. And well, this is not about, just allowing our children to roam wild. This is about actually managing our own expectations and allowing us to look at why we've made a rule, what good that rule is, and what it is about our parenting or our discipline strategy that's important and maybe not so important.
That is so critical. It's easy to make a ton of rules and not even know where they came from. But to kind of step back and say, what are my real values here? Like when we can operate from our deepest values, that is huge. And for me,
and look what we're doing for our children when we do that. That's, yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Awesome. Yeah.
It's not always that simple, obviously, but that's great. That's great. It's a huge, but with these tools, it's very useful. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
It's such an important guidance for us and a way to stay connected with our intuition. I do value creativity and independence, and so I was able to go back to those things in that moment.
Yeah, well said. I love that. That's a great way to say it. So tell us a little bit. Go ahead, please. Continue.
Yeah. Well, what's behind, there's a lot behind all of that, right? You said, this is not about just letting your child run wild. And that's true. What it's really about is understanding that children have several needs that they are meeting. They're meeting one of those needs in any given moment. Yeah. And what we can do is look for what that need is and help them meet it, but in a way that's okay with us.
Mm-hmm.
So in Language of Listening, which was developed by Sandy Blackard, it came out of play therapy. She's kind of synthesized the needs of children down into 3: connection, experience, and power.
Nice.
And so when you're in a situation with your child, instead of just reacting or taking something personally, it's so useful to have this lens of, which need is my child trying to meet right there? With the bathroom, it would have been experience, right?
Right.
And so I could look at that and say, yeah, okay, she's getting this experience. It actually is okay with me. The rule that I have is about cleaning up, afterwards. So,
right.
So I can focus on that and it's all good. Experience is about, how children use their bodies in the world, what they can do. And connection is obviously, that feeling of love and belonging, and power, such an important one, to know that all of these 3 needs are healthy needs for our children's growth. And they have this natural drive to meet those needs. That kind of flip of power being a healthy need was really important for me, to see that Yeah, we all need that feeling of control over our lives, and to look for ways to provide that for my child, just in small ways throughout the day. Like, with a toddler, it's really about, do you want the blue cup or the red cup? Very simple choices,
Yeah.
but that gives them that sense of control.
In a world that is rapidly expanding for them, brain wise, like literally,
Right.
um, they do. That is, I think, such a key point, is the fact that they need to feel in control about something that is, when their world is getting bigger. So, I mean, we all have that. It's an innate human need, I think, for sure. So that reframing of, okay, well, you can have the power within this specific way that I'm comfortable about giving you either of these choices. And I think that's really the key, because I do think we hear, oh, give your child choices. And many parents and caregivers think, well, too many choices isn't good for a child, or well, you're giving him too much control because you're giving him so many options. But to me, it's really all about framing it in giving two options that you're comfortable with either of them. And ultimately, it's essentially, you can have either of these things so that we are going to get to this thing that I am actually in charge of.
Yeah, you have to pay attention to what scenarios you're giving your child the option in, for sure. It's not like, do you want to bike or drive? That's not their choice, their choice, and you're not giving them options when you really actually want them to pick this one.
Right.
It's not like an agenda. You can't have an agenda behind it. It really is. And it's not, well, what would you like for breakfast? One of these 6 things. It's really just these two choices that you're okay with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's great. So when can parents start using these techniques related to the language of listening, would you say, Tracy? Is it something that families also with sort of infants and toddlers of all developmental levels can use as well?
With an infant, there's actually 3 parts to it. And I mentioned the first one, say what you see, being your first reaction in any situation. The next is, if you see something that you don't like, is to give a can do, which is something your child could do instead that meets that need that you identified.
Experience, power, or connection.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
An alternative that would help them meet that need. So if they were jumping on the couch or something and you had a rule against that, I used to have a rule that you could only jump on the couch because we lived in a condo with people below us, but probably a rule that you can't jump on the couch. Then you would think, okay, my child really needs to be very physical right now with their body. So the alternative that I give couldn't be something like, why don't you go do that puzzle?
Right.
It would be more about where you can jump, or when you could jump. So that's the can do. And then the third part is to name a strength. And that's such a beautiful, I love really integrating that into, so many of our interactions with our kids. Yeah. And that is about looking for whatever you can come up with. It could be even in a moment where if they've just, I don't know, they've thrown something. Could you even find a strength in that? Like that they threw something soft, or that they were about to, but they didn't. And they really showed self-control. Or, it's much easier when they shared something with their little friend and you can name for them,
Right.
you share
Right.
that. That was kind. That was generous.
Yeah, that's nice. Or even like, I think with your example of your daughter spraying the mirror, what would you say in something like that situation?
I could say, oh, it almost looks like you're painting on the mirror. You're really creative.
Yeah.
Or I could say, you know what? You wanted to play with water and you found a great place to do that in the bathroom. That's really responsible. I don't know. There's no formula to it. It's
Right. Yeah, just examples.
Yeah, it could be. And you can also maybe, if you forget that part, you can come back later and say, oh, when that happened, I noticed this about you.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about it too is that because it's so specifically tied to what they're doing in that moment, they really have this proof that, yes, this is the kind of person that I am.
Yes.
And
exactly. It's not only is it specific, but it's you're naming that quality. And I love that because, we hear so much about this sort of empty praise that often happens when we're trying to do that, right? Like, good job, or you're doing great, or something like that. You're so good. But if we give an actual quality or attribute, then it's much more powerful because it's an actual example of how we're doing that. I think that's beautiful.
Yes. And it's important to define those qualities because they're nebulous, right? Like, what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be smart? That doesn't mean anything. So,
right.
Yeah.
Really responsible and creative and generous are much more specific.
Yeah, and for them to know in that moment that this particular thing that they did means that. And it's, the reason it's so key is that people, all of us, we behave based on who we believe we are. And, as parents, we're helping define that for our kids by the words that we use.
Yes. Yes. And I think in a roundabout way, we've already touched upon the fact that this is something we can do from birth. Especially those things, naming qualities or one thing that I encourage families to do just as a means to sort of engage in interaction with a baby who's really just sort of inputting everything is to name an action that they're doing or talk about what it is they're doing and really narrate what a child is up to or what you're doing. But giving even sort of what's the word, like assigning even qualities or traits to those behaviors is something you can do from very early on. I'm thinking of when my now 13-month-old was, just starting to sit up around 6-7 months, and he would, start grabbing something from within a basket. I mean, you can certainly say something like, I love how you're getting that from right there. You're really working hard. I love how you're problem solving. You're figuring that out. And that it's all just about sort of naming what's going on, but also naming the qualities of what that looks like. So
absolutely.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, and it's good practice for us too,
Yes.
So, for infants, you're not going to do the can-do step. But around 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, that's great. Wonderful. Yeah. All right, let's take just a very brief break to hear a word from our sponsor, and then we are going to hear a few tips and resources from Tracy about the language of listening and other positive parenting strategies. We weren't meant to parent in isolation. The Strength in Words Community Lab brings you peace of mind. You have what matters when you need it most. We're your parenting brain trust, the place where you can have adult conversations about your baby's babbling and where you're lifted up rather than bogged down. The Community Lab is an all-in-one resource that is not one size fits all. To join us in finding joy in the mayhem, take your free 1-week trial and join us at community.strengthinwords.com. All right, Tracy. So can you give us you've given us so many great sort of basic strategies about what language of listening is and how we can implement it. Can you give us a few more tips for parents and caregivers about different ways to best implement strategies like the ones you've described with our infants and toddlers? I think one thing that we just touched upon is that idea of maybe starting early and getting the practice, because of course it's one thing to say like, look, here are the steps that you can do. Yeah. Here are the tenets that are like this strategy, this method or set of strategies is based upon. But like, what helped you specifically, for instance, when you were learning about it? What were some of the things that helped remind you to use these strategies, and what are some tips that you like to give to parents and caregivers?
Yeah, the first is to just focus on say what you see and don't worry about the rest. And that's it's so simple, but it's amazing how powerful that is. And so when you just, and I think it's just a kind of a simple phrase to keep in your mind, like, say what you see, say what you see. Just, and then as you know, you're not going to think to do it every time, which is totally fine. But what you do start to do is notice the difference in your kid's reaction when you do it. And that is really what keeps you going with it.
Yes.
Yeah. So it really is about
powerful
practice. What's that?
Yeah. I said it's so powerful.
Yeah.
That reaction piece.
Yes. So it's about the practice. It's about giving yourself the space to, you know, not remember to do it. But then you start noticing, I mean, you know, I don't always think to do it. And so I see the difference, you know, in my own child. So, and then, I think just adding one piece at a time, like, don't worry about the strengths yet. And then when you start adding in the strengths, just start with a positive interaction, you know. Yeah, your kid just knocked over the blocks and then started putting them back together, and you're just, you're persistent, you know, just the easy one.
Right, yeah, persistent, that's a good one.
And then move on to like, oh, how could I find a strength in this moment where my kid just snuck into the back of the car and ate a bunch of candy? Oh, okay. I didn't eat all of it.
Right, that's good. Yeah. Look how independent you are. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right. Like there's always something that you can say, but so much of this, I think, is getting into the habit of thinking ahead a little bit, which is so hard, but I find personally to be one of both the most challenging parts of parenting a toddler or preschooler, but also when I get it right, one of the most gratifying. That like, okay, when I get it right, I feel practiced. I feel, what's the word? Just like an Olympic athlete. Like I'm polished. That's the word, you know? I got this. Yeah. And I know that when I pick the right strength to say, or the right, you know, I have the right reaction, that is going to really work for me, work hard for me, and work hard for my child.
Yeah, sure.
For the rest of the day sometimes, which is amazing.
I know. And the cool thing about this is that even when you start kind of going down a path that you begin to regret, you can immediately switch and it still works. It's pretty
Yes.
amazing. Yeah, what? Oh, I forget what I was going to say.
Tell us a little bit more about that as far as you can immediately switch. What might that look like?
Yeah, what's a good story about that? I don't know. I'm like, say with the candy, if I started by saying, "What are you doing in here? Why, you're not supposed to have that."
Right. The normal reaction.
Yeah.
Of most.
Yeah. And then, what would she do if I said that? I'm trying
probably
to
get a sad face, or she'd maybe defend herself, or yeah.
And or just, well, I wanted this, right? If I kept going down my original path, it'd be like, well, you're not supposed to have that. You know better. We've talked about this, whatever. But if I kind of stop and think, no, this isn't getting us where we want to go.
Right.
I literally could just in that moment say, yeah, you really wanted that candy. You wanted it so bad that you snuck into the car to get it because you knew that I didn't want you to have it. That changes the whole tenor of the conversation.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. Like that's so and it is when you say it, it's like, oh my gosh, that's so obvious and so basic, but it completely turns everything around. You're acknowledging what she did. You're acknowledging how it makes you feel. And then she learns that it was not the right way to do it without you ever saying, don't do it.
Yeah. I think, one thing it's given me is a sense of taking the long view. Like, it's not actually that important that she ate a couple pieces of candy right now. It's more important that she learns this concept of self-control and like what tools could you use if you really want something, but you're not supposed to, or, like to, how, maybe it's about putting the candy out of sight, or, like those are the important things that I actually want to teach her.
Right. Yeah. How to learn how to self-regulate, actually.
Yeah. And I understand that that's going to take so much practice. And really, so this was just an opportunity where she practiced, didn't quite get it right. I can make space for that, But yeah, you asked about ways of practicing this, starting with you want or you wanted is a really useful one.
Yeah, that's nice.
For acknowledgement. Yeah.
That's great. Just that, I feel like I'm thinking of so many times in the last couple of days that if I had been using that, it would have been so much smoother. So that's it. Great. And then what are, Tracy, can you just give us a few of your other favorite resources for parents and learning who are interested in learning more about language of listening and other strategies like this?
Yeah. Well, like for a whole range of positive parenting strategies, of course, I think my book is an excellent resource.
Right.
Because it really, I kind of went all out. It covers sleep, feeding, potty training, discipline, play, like executive function, all of it.
And that's called 0 to 5.
It is. Let me show you. It's a pretty blue book.
There it is. It is so pretty. Yay.
Yeah, and it's got, this 1 tip per page kind of thing with
It's almost like a cookbook or a recipe book, which I like the idea of, because it's like it breaks it down into just one tip, one recipe, one thing that you need to think about today or right now.
The ingredients for raising a
happy parent and a happy child. There's your tagline.
There you go. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then on my website, it's 0to5.net. I'm going to be developing a training specifically on language of listening, where we'll go more deeply into all the pieces. But the founder, Sandy Blackard, also has trainings as well. And her website is languageoflistening.com. So
excellent. We'll link to that as well in the show notes.
Yeah, great. And then, I have there are definitely a lot of other influences. Dan Siegel is one, The Whole Brain Child, that he co-authored with Tina Bryson. And sounds like your audience is toddlers, but once you get into that preschool phase and start noticing the triggers,
we'll all get there eventually.
Yeah. Their book, Parenting from the Inside Out, I found really helpful.
Great.
And then just, I'm part of this kind of mindfulness, simplicity, thoughtful parenting kind of realm. So books along those lines have been useful too. I'm happy to send a list that you can post.
Please do. Yeah, we'll put them all in the show notes. That would be really helpful. Thank you so much, Tracy. And thanks to all of our Community Lab members who are listening live. We're about to continue the discussion and open up for a Q&A session for you guys in just a minute. We've got a lot of questions here in the comments. But for everyone listening from home or on the go, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.